The seemingly more popular idea is that yes, FNAF 4 takes place in 1983, however this bite was just an accident. That crying child's tears loosened the spring locks of Fredbear and caused the mouth to shut with insane force, crushing his skull. And honestly, this could be the case. Maybe it was Scott's intention. However, based on everything we know about this series, the fact that this is a spring lock failure, frankly, is impossible. Let me explain. In FNAF 3, we learn about the springlock suits and how dangerous they actually are. Their springlock mechanisms make the suits really dangerous when being worn by an employee. But that's the keyword here, when being worn. The springlock mechanism of the suit, which itself is also referred to as a springlock, is what moves the robotic bits that actually move the animatronic to the edge of the suit, allowing for an employee to climb inside. Quote from FNAF 3's phone calls. To change the animatronics to suit mode, enter and turn firmly the hand crank provided by the manufacturer. Turning the crank will recoil and compress the animatronic parts around the sides of the suit, providing room to climb inside. Please make sure the spring locks are fastened tight to ensure the animatronic devices remain fixed. So, the danger from these spring lock animatronics comes from these robotic parts being moved to the side. Since if the spring lock mechanisms fail, the parts that actually make the robot move will want to shoot back into place, which is where your body is. This is why Springtrap is both human and animatronic, because while William was inside, the spring locks failed, causing the endoskeleton to try and occupy the same space as his body, creating absolutely agonizing pain. However, during the bite of 83, when Crying Child is in Fredbear's mouth, Fredbear is in animatronic mode, not suit mode. We can tell this since there is no head inside the mouth already, like there was earlier in the game when we see Purple Guy helping someone into this same suit. So, since the spring locks aren't moving any robotic parts away, they do not have the ability to fail. Besides, even if this was a spring lock failure, there would be no robotic bits to move away in the mouth, since all it does is open and close. There's no need for spring locks in an area that's just open air and has no actual animatronic parts. So, in this moment, Fredbear is operating just like how any other normal unpossessed animatronic would, like any Chuck E. Cheese animatronic would, or how any It's a Small World ride animatronic would work. So the question moves from is this a spring lock failure to could a normal animatronic actually crush a skull? And again, the answer is no. Animatronics, while kept under wraps for the most part, are reliant on pneumatic actuators to move. Basically a piston from Minecraft, but using air pressure to move the pistons up and down. And while this can move a lot of weight, in this case it doesn't need to, okay? We're talking about an animatronic jaw. And as we can see in the same bite clip, the pistons pushing Crying Child's skull are only moving the top 3/4 of Fredbear's face, which means that they can be much smaller and still get the job done. And they are. Because no way you're getting an actuator that can move the leg and then putting it in the jaw. It's not cost effective. And William is a businessman after all. So, what does all this mean? Well, basically, moving the Fredbear head would require around 40 to 50 psi, or pounds per square inch, to actually move, which is far below the required amount to actually crush a skull, which MatPat estimates is around 1900 psi, which in context would mean that the animatronic head was biting down with a force 38 to 47 times the power that would be actually required to move the head. And that's only what's needed to move the head up. Moving it down wouldn't use any force because it's just gravity doing all the work. So, how could Crying Child's skull have been crushed? Well, at this point, it would have had to be a superpowered animatronic, which wouldn't make sense unless we remember who we're talking about here. William Afton's goal is to kill kids using these animatronics. Thanks to FNAF AR's Fast Facts, we know that the Funtime robots were among some of the first animatronics built by Afton, meaning he always intended on killing even before his kids got killed. So, superpowering an animatronic so it can kill isn't out of the question, especially if he wants to use it as a backup suit in case Spring Bonnie fails. In order for this damage to occur, William would have had to install industrial strength actuators into Fredbear's mouth. They're as long as a child's wingspan and require their own separate air compressors to function. And that would have to be going both ways because, again, gravity would be doing all the work just letting it go down, so it would have to be pushing down, which clearly indicates that this is intentional. And for those who live by MatPat's word and consider it law in this series, he agrees with me. He made a whole video on this subject as well that states that this could not be a spring lock failure and that it could not be a normal animatronic. What does this mean for the series then? How does this change the things that we know? Well, it instantly puts Crying Child up as a candidate for the one you should not have killed. While William may not have taken his life directly, he did superpower Fredbear's jaw, which did kill him. And unlike with Elizabeth, this isn't because he didn't listen to William. This is because William changed the animatronic. If he hadn't done so, his son would still be alive. William would certainly consider Crying Child one that he should not have killed. Secondly, since at this point we know that the two animatronics present at this location are Spring Bonnie and Fredbear, and the fun times would then come next, thanks to Fast Facts again, Golden Freddy may not have even been created yet. Scott also used his son's picture for the face of the one you should not have killed in Ultimate Custom Night, which does not feel like a coincidence considering how Crying Child is William's son. And most importantly, Crying Child dies in the hospital after being bit. We hear the flat line at the end of the game as the screen fades, and I doubt that they have that equipment in a Fazbear restaurant, meaning that the Fredbear animatronic and Golden Freddy, if he was even created yet, were nowhere to be seen. This would in turn mean that the Golden Freddy we see jittering at the end of Ultimate Custom Night isn't because of Crying Child possessing the robot, but because that's what he remembers. A golden bear animatronic is what killed him. It also explains how William is being tormented by the nightmare animatronics that only Crying Child could see in FNAF 4, and why in Midnight Motorist William is orange and not purple, because at the time his son was still alive, meaning he wasn't possessed by him yet, which is where the color purple comes from, and why the orange man was included seemingly at random. Again, FNAF 6 was all about tying up the loose ends, right? So this is tying up a loose end. It also lines up with the boy we see representing the one you should not have killed in the man in room 1280, since Crying Child is a boy. This also means that Cassidy is the only soul inside of Golden Freddy, and that the only animatronic to contain two souls is the Stitch Wraith. The line of "It's me" from FNAF 1 makes sense if the animatronics think that Mike is William, as we learn in Sister Location, since Cassidy would say, "Hey, it's me, Cassidy, one of your victims." Or it could be written off, since at that point the game had no deeper story, or at least not 9 games worth of it. And Crying Child wasn't even introduced yet, making it unlikely that Scott would put the unseen killer's son in the animatronic, especially since it was his last attempt at making it in the game industry. He wasn't really all that confident in it. I originally stumbled upon this idea when researching more about my Michael Afton is a robot Crying Child theory, but this has nothing to do with that, I'm just providing context. The main piece of evidence I was looking for was that Cassidy would not share a vessel, so if Cassidy was possessing Golden Freddy, the amount of anger and agony that Cassidy has would not allow for another soul to possess the suit alongside her, no matter who it was, even if it was her killer's son, especially not her killer's son. So it's just Cassidy possessing Golden Freddy, I hear you asking? Because this would just be circumstantial and based on your opinion of how you see the character of Cassidy. You could see her as being more than willing to share the suit with William's son, since they both suffered the same wickedness, right? Yes, and that is entirely true, except I have some ideas that would present an entirely different solution to this problem. Allow me to explain. Fazbear Frights has given us hints as to how the game world operates over the last year or so. So far, with 9 books in the series being released, with the 10th coming out on my birthday this year and an 11th shortly after. However, there is one book that I'd like to call attention to, and I'm sure you can all tell which one it's gonna be. In room 1280 of Heracles Hospital, something evil is keeping a man alive. A man with gruesome burns all over his body and an iron will to live. The man in room 1280 is the 3rd story in the 5th Fazbear Frights book, Bunny Call, the only Fazbear Frights book that I currently own, for good reason. I have the 10th pre-ordered though, don't worry. The story, written by Andrea Wagner, revolves around a man with, as the book summary described, horrific burns all over his body. His organs are exposed, his face is missing, he has burn marks all over his body, and this man was taken off life support years prior to the story, yet somehow is still alive. The story ends with this horrifically damaged man being taken to a Fazbear Entertainment distribution center where he promptly explodes. This story is obviously meant to represent, or very well be, William Afton, who did end up escaping the FNAF 6 fire but was horrifically damaged because of it. The story was meant to show us that William had a soul possessing him, the soul of a young boy with curly black hair, rosy cheeks, and an alligator mask. The mask being in reference to the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 2. This explained how William always came back, how he survived the spring locking, the FNAF 3 fire, the FNAF 6 fire, and how he possessed a hard drive to be scanned in FNAF VR. He was taken to the warehouse before his death. But one thing always really bothered me about this story. Who is that kid? From what I understand in the epilogue, the boy then becomes a second soul inside of the Stitch Wraith, and that's what made everyone think that Golden Freddy had two souls, but I don't think that's what the story was trying to tell us. There's always been some form of confusion around the one you should not have killed, the one who keeps torturing William in Ultimate Custom Night. We all thought that it was Cassidy, who we assumed to be Golden Freddy, who was the one doing it, that she had trapped William in purgatory and was making him relive the horrors that he caused over all those years. But that, with the release of this book, was disproven, since William wasn't in purgatory or hell, but rather his own mind, stuck in the hospital either on life support or just being kept alive by this spirit, meaning that this kid would have to be the main antagonist of that game, the one that we see shaking at the end if we manage to beat 50/20 mode. This presents two different outcomes, neither of which are what we first expected though. It's weird. I'm gonna go over them, don't worry. First, the simple answer. The kid from the Fazbear Frights books was just a deviation meant to show us that William was possessed by someone, showing us how he was kept alive, meaning that someone in the games would most likely be Cassidy. And the one you should not have killed was not Golden Freddy. Cassidy in this case would not be able to be Golden Freddy, since while multiple souls can possess one thing in FNAF canon, we have not seen evidence that one soul can possess multiple things. In fact, that has been disproven time and time again in the series, with the puppet having to give life to the animatronics after they've had a soul, or I guess agony, inside of them. This would mean that Golden Freddy was either possessed by another soul, or that everything having to do with Golden Freddy is an illusion. The other outcome would be that this kid from the books, the boy with the alligator mask, is Crying Child. That William's son, after being sent to the hospital and put in a coma by Fredbear, went on to possess his father and keep him alive after learning of his misdeeds. This is just as likely a scenario for me, if not even more likely, since it explains a lot of what we hear and see from characters in Ultimate Custom Night, such as Nightmare Fredbear, whose appearance should only be known to the Crying Child, but it presents itself in William's nightmare, as well as multiple lines, such as "We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them," which is in reference to when the Crying Child dies at the end of FNAF 4, when psychic friend Fredbear says, "We are still your friends, do you still believe that?" But remember that those Fredbear plushies are actually cameras created by William to watch his son, meaning that this line, if it was coming from Fredbear, would really be coming from William, as would the line "I will put you back together," which is also referenced in Ultimate Custom Night, when Nightmare Fredbear says, "I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed." How would Cassidy know about this line, about the "I will put you back together," about the appearance of any of the Nightmare animatronics for that matter, unless she had seen them herself? If this was Crying Child, it would make a whole heck of a lot of sense, especially because of that line, "I am remade, but not by you." It sounds sassy, like I was remade, but you didn't do it like you said you would. Like if your friend falls through on a promise, so then you say like, "Oh, I went bowling, but not with you." I have a friend who does that a lot. He's not even really a friend anymore, just because he is not really a good person. He's not watching, so it's fine. This also explains Nightmare's line of "the shadow fears me," which I originally thought was meant to be about William fearing death, since the purple of the purple guy was meant to represent a shadow. But the one thing that made me sure about this theory was the fact that the alligator mask boy from the man in room 1280 is described as a shadow. If this is the Crying Child, who was being referenced as a shadow, it would explain this line. Nightmare is the final antagonist of FNAF 4, the one that Crying Child fears the most, the representation of death, of William's wickedness. The Crying Child has to be the one who possesses William. I mean, it makes sense, William was there when Crying Child died. The Golden Freddy suit wasn't, but William was. When Crying Child died in the hospital, we know that from his lines going through psychic friend Fredbear, he was there with his son. As for why Golden Freddy is moving at the end of the game though, that could simply be a visual way of showing us that William would be back in the next game, by having one of his victims convulsing. Or it could be Crying Child showing William a version of the Fredbear plush. I think that this has to be the explanation, and if not, then Scott needs to fix his narrative structure, because not Not only does this make sense, it works in a story sense as well, and honestly fits so many things into place and feels good in a narrative sense. There we have it, friends, my explanation as to how we were wrong about Golden Freddy. This theory makes so much sense to me, and honestly I didn't expect to come to that conclusion. The idea that I had in my head going into it was totally different than when I finished. The one you should not have killed is Crying Child. I mean, even William would consider him the one that you should not have killed. Damn. Alright, first things first, could Golden Freddy be a pure hallucination, and could that really make any sense? I mean, he seems to cause hallucinations for us, but is that him controlling them, or are they just appearing alongside him? Well, by definition, hallucinations are an experience involving the apparent perception of something not present. So they're sensory experiences that appear real but are created by your mind. They can affect all 5 of your senses as well, not just sight, and for example, you might hear a voice that no one else can hear in the room, or you can see an image that isn't real, or maybe even feel the texture of something that isn't actually there. I remember that as a kid once I either was dreaming or hallucinated my basement being filled with boulders that I had to clean out. I don't know why I thought it was my job, but that kind of explains a lot now. My parents didn't see them though, and then just kept telling me to go to bed. They thought I was doing a bit or something, but this definitely explains a lot. Hallucinations though may be caused by mental illness, the side effect of medications, or physical illnesses like epilepsy or alcohol use. Not getting enough sleep can also lead to hallucinations. You may be more prone to hallucinations if you haven't slept in multiple days or didn't get enough sleep over longer periods of time, and it's also possible to experience hallucinations right before falling asleep, known as hypnagogic hallucinations, or right before waking up from sleep, known as hypnopompic hallucinations, which is why sometimes you may hear a voice or something that sounds like a voice while you're dozing off. But it's also not just limited to sleep. High fevers, migraines, social isolation, seizures, terminal illness, and high levels of stress can all also cause hallucinations. And honestly, based on the first game alone, I can see why we would have high levels of stress and probably be sleep deprived. I mean, our shift is from 12 to 6 AM, and that's only the part that we actually get to play, and I'm sure the working environment is pretty awful and we're alone the whole time, which not only increases the stress, but the feelings of social isolation as well. And that's only within the first game. If we want to talk about the series as a whole, we play as Michael Afton in basically every game, with the exception of a few. So we can use this to kind of understand what's really going on. In the cutscenes to Sister Location, we learn that Michael was used as a vessel to help Ennard and whoever was inside of Ennard to escape the underground facility that's the main setting for that game. However, in the process, we end up becoming purple from all the bruising, because you know, metal parts are moving inside of us, and the neighborhood we live in ends up becoming afraid of us. See the "you won't die" scene for proof of that one, because everyone is hiding behind their homes as we walk down the street and then eventually puke Ennard out. They start off loving us, waving and smiling, but eventually become terrified and actively avoid us. If that's not gonna start the feeling of social isolation, I don't know what is. And I know what is. And we know that the original games have to come after these events, because we're not only sent here by our father, who would have a tough time doing this trapped in a secret room, but also because of the cited reasons for being fired at the end of the original games. Odor is always listed, meaning that we've definitely been through some rough patches. And it's also worth noting that in Sister Location, where the stress, social isolation, and probably the sleep deprivation begin, Golden Freddy doesn't appear as an animatronic, but instead as a reference in the custom night menu, which can't really be considered canon, because in the actual story of the games you wouldn't be able to customize things. So Golden Freddy only starts showing up after Michael goes through extreme trauma, and seems to only be seen by Michael. Golden Freddy doesn't show up anywhere in promotional material for any of the restaurants, even before the Bite of 87, since him causing the Bite of 87 could be considered the reason why they stopped promoting him. But even in FNAF 2, which is just before the Bite of 87, since it may even take place during the events of that week, we don't see any art for the new Golden Freddy. While he does appear in the post-Night 3 cutscene, these are also referred to as the end of night hallucinations, meaning that they obviously aren't real. But also, it's an interesting point of contention. Here you would think that the theory would start to fall apart because, well, it's a hallucination, yes. At this point in the game, we're playing as Jeremy Fitzgerald, right? And while yes, during the main 5 nights we play as Jeremy, more on that later, that doesn't really mean that these hallucinations have to be his. Think about how the hallucinations are being presented, okay? They're the location from the first game, a game where we know we play as Michael Afton. Much like how Michael was part robot after his Sister Location fiasco, and we're inside the Freddy animatronic specifically, like how Michael would associate the character with the one who ended up killing his brother. And Golden Freddy shows up as another hallucination on top of that. These hallucinations are clearly meant to show us how Michael is figuring out what to do next. And not only are they showing the next location that he would go to, they're also what brings him to the FNAF 2 location. Notice how he sees the puppet after night 4 in game, and then we don't really get another end night cutscene, simply because by night 6 we're actually playing as Mike. Sure, we get a check that says that Jeremy worked overtime, but really? Making or even letting an employee work overtime after one of your animatronics removed his frontal lobe? Yeah, no, that check is cleverly disguised hush money from an already shady company. Michael gets there on night 6 and takes over, only to get fired shortly thereafter. On the pink slip it says on the first day, really? But that seems to be one of those I think thou doth protest too much kind of things. Like, why do you feel the need to point that out on this pink slip? The notes section is for reasoning behind the firing and explanations, especially in a legal sense, so those who get fired can't really try and file wrongful termination suits, or at least if they do, they won't really have much legs. We also know that Fritz Smith is Michael Afton using an alias since he gets fired for the same reasons Michael does in the first game. The logical extension of that being that they're the same person, who had to change their name again when they applied to the next place because, you know, the company would have a record of Fritz Smith being fired. And considering how Fritz is one of the missing children's names, yeah, it's meant to be a fake name. Nobody other than Mike seemingly can see Golden Freddy, and whenever we do see him, it's never operational, and it's never in a tangible sense. In all forms, Golden Freddy is slumped over, there's no light in his eyes, and he's always in our office. We don't see him on a camera at any point, so where the hell on earth could he have come from if he is using supernatural abilities to move himself? Some explain this in the first game by saying that he was hiding out in the kitchen since the camera wasn't working, but in FNAF 2, we don't have any cameras that aren't functional, so where on earth could he have come from? It doesn't make sense even with the FNAF universe logic. Hell, we even see Shadow Freddy on the cameras, but not Golden Freddy. Huh. Weird. Speaking of his weird abilities, what's with the whole crashing us to the desktop thing? Every other animatronic sends us to the main menu, but Golden Freddy sends us to our desktop. That's a very odd detail that I don't think anyone is really questioning, but it certainly seems to indicate that there is something special about this character. And I don't think that it's that they're just angrier than the other ones, because that wouldn't really change anything. I think it's more symbolic than that. You see, the only other character that when killing us crashes us to our desktop is Nightmare from FNAF 4, and that is not a coincidence. FNAF 4 is where we see the inciting moment that starts all of this trauma for Michael, where he feels guilty for getting his brother killed despite it not really being his fault. Sure, he put his brother's head in the animatronic mouth, but William is the one who made the mouth intentionally superpowered. When I've said this in the past, in previous videos, at one point someone used the analogy of if someone puts your hand under a hydraulic press and then your hand is crushed, it's not the person who made the hydraulic press's fault. And you know what? You're right, that's true. However, if that hydraulic press was designed to stop before it reached the hand, or it wasn't supposed to have enough power to actually crush a hand, then the manufacturer who gave it too much power or messed it up, it's them at fault. Or I guess technically a better analogy would be if your car's airbags don't deploy during an accident, since that's more realistic than a hydraulic press stopping. In a settlement reached following mediation, attorneys Alan Feldman, Daniel Mann, and Edward Goldis obtained a multi-million-dollar recovery on behalf of a teenage girl who suffered catastrophic brain injuries in a car accident. Her car slid off the road during a rainstorm and struck a tree broadside, and the head curtain airbags and the chest and thorax airbags in the vehicle failed to deploy during the accident. They could prove that if the car had been manufactured correctly, the girl wouldn't have suffered any injuries, and thus the company settled instead of taking it to court. The same principle applies here. Had this not have been William's own child, if the family who lost their kids sued William, he would have been cleaned out. But of course, Michael didn't know that it wasn't his fault at the time. He learned that after Sister Location, which sets him on his journey. But going back to the connection between Golden Freddy and Nightmare, they're the only two animatronics that crashes to the desktop. And while with Golden Freddy that may not make much sense, with Nightmare having the same ability, it sets a baseline for what's really going on when this happens. Nightmare and FNAF FNAF 4 is representative of death. He's the dark shadow that's coming after Crying Child during his coma in the hospital after the bite of 83. Notice how Nightmare is a shadow version of Nightmare Fredbear, Fredbear being the animatronic that he would be most afraid of, because you know, it's the one that crushed him. And his Ultimate Custom Night voice lines support this idea. Quote, "I am here to claim what is left of you. You will not be spared, you will not be saved, and I am your wickedness made of flesh." All of these are indicators that Nightmare is meant to be death, especially in FNAF 4. And when Nightmare gets us, we crash to the desktop. We truly die. Not like when the other animatronics get us and we go back to the main menu. This time around, we're actually jump scared to death. The same must be the case for Golden Freddy, and considering how Nightmare is in essence also a hallucination, it would make sense for Golden Freddy to be able to jump scare us to death as well. A death that doesn't involve violence, and instead your heart giving out due to fear, hence the desktop crash. Golden Freddy being a hallucination would not only explain a lot, but it would also help clear things up. Golden Freddy being a real animatronic allows for Cassidy to be the one you should not have killed, since she can possess William without us having to worry about who's in the suit. The "it's me" line also makes sense now, since it would be referring to the animatronic that killed Mike's brother, or it could even be Mike assuming that Crying Child went on to possess the Fredbear animatronic because Mike knows that Elizabeth is possessing Baby, and it makes sense why we can't see Golden Freddy on the cameras, why he's never advertised, but also why he would be haunting William in Ultimate Custom Night, since William would also see Golden Freddy as the one who took his son. Well, at least if it is William in Ultimate Custom Night, since with this revelation now, it could be Mike. Cassidy could still be possessing William, but someone else may be possessing Michael, causing him to suffer since he blames his big brother for his death. Michael being the Ultimate Custom Night player explains why we would still see Golden Freddy in the final cutscene. It makes sense with the dialogue of the Ultimate Custom Night death screens, and it explains why Spring and Scrap Trap are there, because why would William be haunting himself? He doesn't seem to regret anything he's done. Michael being possessed by Crying Child explains why he knows what Nightmare Fredbear looks like, since he draws it in the survival logbook, and it explains why Cassidy and Crying Child could communicate in that book, not because they share an animatronic, but because they share a purpose, to punish those who did them wrong, or I guess to punish those they consider the causes for their death. And then it allows for Michael to be possessing Glamrock Freddy for his redemption, because Crying Child was keeping him alive through FNAF 6's fire. While I may have had prior bias to the idea that Crying Child is the vengeful spirit, aka the one you should not have killed, I really do want to get to the bottom of this, genuinely. So, when researching for Cassidy, I was keeping an open mind and using every source that I could. Multiple things stuck out to me as being commonly referred to as evidence for Cassidy. The final scene of Ultimate Custom Night where Golden Freddy is twitching after you beat 50/20 mode. The survival logbook, which seemingly contains conversations between Crying Child and Cassidy. The voice lines you can hear behind the mediocre melodies sound like a girl, like the ones that play slightly after the main mediocre melodies ones. And William actually killed Cassidy directly, as far as we can tell, whereas Michael put Crying Child in Fredbear's mouth. And these are some good points, and not something to discount. These are also the points that made me believe that Cassidy was the one you should not have killed originally as well. There's also the point that when the animatronics refer to the character as he, they're simply referring to the Golden Freddy animatronic, since Golden Freddy is a male character, as well as Cassidy's name containing the Cass prefix, which means curly-haired in Gaelic, and the character of Andrew, who represents the vengeful spirit in the Fazbear Fright story The Man in Room 1280, has curly black hair. There's also the two-eye theory from FNAF 3. The two-eye theory states that in the FNAF 3 bad ending, there are two eyes lit up in the head and the back, which we assume to be Golden Freddy to show that there are two souls inside the animatronic. I do have rebuttals for Crying Child points as well, alright, so don't worry, but I feel like it's important to not only talk about the evidence, but also give countering points to it as well. These are mostly coming from my brain, but after over 350 FNAF videos on my own, I feel like I am more than qualified to discuss this. The Golden Freddy final scene in Ultimate Custom Night can easily be explained away if you do believe the two souls theory, since if it was Crying Child in the suit as well, this would make sense. It could also be due to the fact that he was put in a coma by the Fredbear animatronic, which is a golden bear like Golden Freddy. The he pronoun being used to describe the vengeful spirit is a really hit to the Cassidy theory as well, since why would they be describing the gender of an animatronic when they're talking about the kid that died? Especially when, thanks to the mediocre melodies, we know that these animatronics are just saying the things that they're made to say by the one you should not have killed, meaning the spirit is really the one using these pronouns, so why wouldn't they use their own and instead use the animatronics? The voice lines sound like a girl because, well, they're voiced by a girl. The casting call on voices.com was very general and said that the actress could lean towards either a male or a female. The survival logbook having two spirits doesn't really have anything to do with Cassidy being a vengeful spirit, and the Cass prefix, while yes meaning curly haired in Gaelic, seems to me like a bit of a stretch. The whole name of Cassidy is Irish in origin and means the clever one. The origin of this name is also 65% Irish and only 5% Gaelic, meaning if we want to go off meaning, we should be going with the majority, which would be the clever one, which really doesn't do anything to help this theory. And the 2-eye theory has been debunked by us in the past in its own video and also on my Instagram in a reel. However, I'll go over it here. In an interview with Doco, Scott confirmed that while making FNAF 3, it was intended to be the finale, that there was no intended next game, meaning that at that point there were no other characters that could possess Golden Freddy. The lights being on in both eyes is simply because the light is bouncing off the inside of the head, and to show us that it actually is an animatronic head that was supposed to be Freddy, since if it was only one eye it could also kind of look like Bonnie. Or hell, if it's only one eye we would have thought that it was another Foxy. Now there is a lot more evidence for Crying Child in my opinion, okay? Whenever I asked others who thought that it was Cassidy why they thought it was Cassidy instead, they all ended up giving me the same points. That Cassidy was killed directly, the two souls theory, and the gender confusion of the animatronic. Typically, nothing additional was added, okay? I'm sorry, it's just how it went. So now let's go over some of the evidence I gathered for Crying Child's case. Cassidy was released in the Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3, hence why the original animatronics don't appear in FNAF 6 when Henry is trying to put everything involving Fazbear Entertainment to rest. If Cassidy is at rest as well, she cannot be possessing William. The spirit possessing William also, from what we've seen in the games, cannot be possessing both him and the Golden Freddy animatronic. If he can possess multiple things, then the two souls theory helps explain that as well, despite two souls and multiple possessions coming out of seemingly nowhere as far as the games are concerned. As I said, the casting call also said whoever got the part could lean towards a male or a female voice. And considering how Tabitha Scaines, the actress who got the part, is female, it would make sense for her to lean towards a female voice. It's also worth noting that most prepubescent male characters have female voice actors. Danny Phantom, Timmy Turner, Ash Ketchum, all these characters have female voice actors because they're young, so the same would be the case for Crying Child. The appearance of the Nightmare animatronics in FNAF 4 as well also seems to be impossible unless the one creating that situation, the Vengeful Spirit, had seen them before. And since FNAF 4 was a dream, as confirmed by Ultimate Custom Night in lines like "This is a nightmare you won't wake from," Crying Child is the only one to have seen these animatronics. Crying Child also dies in a hospital after suffering through the agony of his coma nightmare, which would give him the power to latch onto something nearby, which would have most likely been his father. There's also weaker evidence like the fact that the image used for the Vengeful Spirit is just a blown out image of Scott's son, which could be a parallel to William's son. Andrew from the Man in Room 1280 is also a male, and while yes, Michael put Crying Child's head into the robot, William was the one who made the robot and also made it powerful enough to crush a skull, whereas a normal animatronic would be unable to do so, which is what Michael assumed would happen. He didn't think that it was going to kill his brother. Something that MapHat also agrees with. If, like some commenters have said, they only care about what he says and not the actual evidence. And while there is more evidence for Crying Child, there are also some things that don't have clean answers. The same is true for Cassidy. Cassidy might not have been released in the Happiest Day minigame, despite it seemingly being the case. The Nightmare animatronics also do appear in FNAF VR, which could have been due to the scanning of the hard drive that created Glitch Trap, who had seen the nightmares at this point, but it doesn't explain the fact that Michael drew Nightmare Fredbear in the survival logbook, unless this is something that he drew beforehand and then showed to Crying Child, hence why they showed up in his dreams, but that involves assumptions that I'm just not comfortable making. Crying Child does die in a hospital, however, while we haven't really seen proof that you can possess something far away in the games, we also technically haven't seen proof that says you can't. In my personal opinion, the lack of evidence is in and of itself evidence against that, but I guess I can see why others wouldn't be so quick to accept that. The same idea with possessing multiple things. The whole image being of Scott's son thing is kind of weak, but considering that the FNAF 4 home was also decorated with images of his family, I'd actually like to think that this is more important than we realize. Because sure, using his own assets is cheaper than buying them, but this seems very deliberate. If the images in the FNAF 4 home were supposed to be of William and his family, and they were of Scott's family, and then Scott's son is used for something else, yeah. But people will hone in on how that is circumstantial. The biggest rebuttal for Crying Child, however, is that William didn't kill him, Michael did. And since Crying Child is William's son, he wouldn't want to torture his dad. And while this can be true, we have to remember that Crying Child is again also a child, who most likely saw his sister get scooped by Baby, who got scared when he saw his father putting a worker into the Fredbear suit, and one of Scott's hints from that live stream oh so long ago was what is seen in shadows is often misunderstood in the mind of a child. Even without seeing William give the superpower he needed to the animatronic in order to make it a killbot, Crying Child knows that William is making killbots. He knows that he made Baby, and he knows that William made Fredbear. So getting killed by the animatronic wouldn't necessarily be Michael's fault, it would be William's. Much like how Elizabeth's death was his fault as well. And being family doesn't mean that you can't dislike or even hate those people, okay? Being related to you doesn't automatically give people a free pass for doing horrific acts. If my father was a serial killer who killed my little sister, and then killed me using overpowered animatronics, you best believe I'm coming back with a vengeance. And also, just one final point in general, in that interview with Daco that is still available on Daco's channel, Scott said that FNAF 3 was intended to be the final game. This question is presented 21 minutes into the video if you want to actually look at the timecode, when asked about which ending of FNAF 3 is canon. However, Scott also refuses to answer that question, because he knows how passionate the community gets, and cites the argument over Mangle's gender as a reason why he won't answer it. He says that it's complicated. And to me, this sounds like it's because what people generally understand in this series would be countered by which ending is canon. The good ending would have released Cassidy's soul, which would in turn make it impossible for her to be the vengeful spirit, since that minigame was in fact not Crying Child, okay? He hadn't been introduced yet. And according to a recent community poll, which actually inspired this video, the generally accepted idea is that Cassidy is the vengeful spirit. So, if he had countered that, everyone would have all been up in a tizzy, okay? This was also after Ultimate Custom Night had been released, so yeah. In a 10, Crying Child. Okay, now this one is certainly going to be a bit controversial, but there is no way that I could have done this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates of my DMs ever. I say this every time I bring it up. I don't think that Crying Child's death was a Springlock failure, and I firmly believe that they are the one you should not have killed, meaning that they're the vengeful spirit possessing Afton and keeping him alive instead of being inside Golden Freddy. But with that being said, it's still possible that I'm wrong, okay? I'm man enough to admit it, and that's what this list is all about. Well, possibilities, not me being wrong. The idea that Crying Child is the one possessing Golden Freddy comes from the idea that the Fredbear animatronic that kills him in 1983 is converted into Golden Freddy come FNAF 1 in 1993, either because the Springlock suits got decommissioned despite this not being a Springlock failure, and then the Golden Freddy suit is just a shell, or because Afton didn't want to look at the thing that killed his son. And while this is a possibility, we know that Crying Child didn't actually die in the mouth of the suit. He died because of his head being crushed, yes, but he dies in the hospital as proven by the flatline at the end of FNAF 4. But I mean, everyone's gonna be mad at me for saying this anyway, so I guess I'm just not gonna read the video comments. In at 9, Jeremy Fitzgerald. At the end of every FNAF game, there's a bonus night. Then it gives you more lore clues, then it gives you more scares. But then after beating that one, you unlock a 7th night where you can customize the animatronics and give them like specific levels to see how hard you can really make it for yourself. However, if you were to do this in Five Nights 1, you'd obviously be looking for more clues, trying to figure out like the first in what would be an incredible series of games. If you tried to solve this though by being sneaky and inputting the animatronic levels to be 1, 9, 8, and 7, the year of the infamous bite, or at least the first one, you'd end up getting instantly jump scared by Golden Freddy, which, while hilarious, is still creepy and unexpected. I mean, like, I get that Scott wanted to shut rumors down about there being like a secret camera or something, but like, why couldn't this just be a normal night? that's proved them wrong because it wasn't real. Like, what if someone wanted to actually have those levels for whatever reason, and then boom, they get spooked by Golden Freddy instantly? It's kind of rude, okay? But it's also interesting to think that the year 1987 would summon Golden Freddy. If you end up thinking about it, and end up thinking about it too much probably, that this could be an implication that Golden Freddy caused the bite of 87, and that Jeremy Fitzgerald, who we play as in FNAF 2, who many assume to be the bite victim, could be the one possessing the animatronic. At least if we ignore that the missing children's incident takes place 2 years prior. In a day multiple. The prevalent theory for Golden Freddy is that the animatronic is actually possessed by two souls. This idea comes from the survival logbook and the FNAF 3 bad ending 2-eye theory. The 2-eye theory states that in the FNAF 3 bad ending there are two eyes lit up in the head in the back, which we are assuming is Golden Freddy, to show that there are two souls in the animatronic. Well, with regards to the 2-eye theory at least, that's incorrect. You see, it would actually be more difficult to tell that the thing in the back was an animatronic head if there was only one eye lit up, since all we see of this head are the eyes, and the light comes out of the other eye just due to the reflection of the first light, since it's that dark. Notice how Freddy also has some light coming out of his other eye. You can't really ignore how light works in this situation, okay? It's just like a fundamental law of everything. Plus, Crying Child, who many assume to be the second spirit, hadn't been introduced into the series yet, not coming until the next game that wasn't even going to happen originally, since this was supposed to be the bed of the series. That's why we released the Souls in the Happiest Day minigame. And notice that there's only one person wearing a Golden Freddy mask in the minigame. If there were two spirits that were intended at this stage, wouldn't there have been two kids wearing the mask? I mean, it was supposed to be the end after all. And according to the official Freddy Files Updated Edition book, quote, you'll see an image of broken animatronic heads, each with a lit eye. 1. In at 7, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all time. We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sounds of multiple animatronics banging on his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. I mean, like, we know he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories is that the animatronics ended up getting him and shoving him into a suit, resulting in a painful death, especially since at this point the Springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't really been totally removed. I don't know, the actual timeline of events for the Springlock suits is a little messy still, since we don't really have the years for things like them getting scrapped. Yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one, or maybe used it to hide from them and then it failed. However, another theory is that he gets killed by Golden Freddy, which could mean that he might end up possessing the animatronic. We have to get the whole shadow animatronics thing somehow, right? Plus, we very clearly hear Golden Freddy in the recording of Phone Guy just before he dies, suggesting that they had a prominent part in his demise. I mean, like, it's highly unlikely, but honestly, Phone Guy is more important to us than Cassidy does, so it could make more sense. At least, if this wasn't after the missing children's incident. And at 6, Random. Honestly, there's also a slim chance that this is just a random kid that Afton killed in the incident, and they just haven't been named yet. And that this whole time we've been like being fed red herrings just to keep us talking about the series now that games aren't coming out every 3 months. And honestly, that's nothing new. Companies use that kind of marketing all the time to increase hype and discussion without really having to spend any money. I mean, look at how No Way Home was marketed, okay? I don't know how anyone would have gotten a picture of Andrew Garfield on set like that without anyone noticing, or without being connected to the company, okay? Like, in my opinion, that leaked image of him in the final fight scene had to be intentional, but the posters they were also releasing were just horrifying to start with. I mean, like, the first picture looked like something I would have made in high school, but I would have done a better job, okay? But I mean, no matter what, it worked. We were talking about how bad the poster was, and then every new poster that they had released after because they were of the same quality. And not even just nerd or news channels. Even Photoshop channels were remaking the poster in better quality. They never had to spend a dime to get us talking about that, and by making worse posters, they probably spent less on the graphics budget for those as well. So the possibility of Golden Freddy being revealed to have been possessed by a random person we've never heard of isn't out of the realm of possibility for me, alright? It could happen. Plus, it's definitely like Scott to do that. Halfway through into number 5, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Frights story The New Kid from the 3rd Fazbear Frights book 135 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist, Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours, because, you know, that wouldn't result in death normally. However, when they unleash their plan, the Springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. I don't know how you were planning to lock him in there if you weren't going to use the actual Springlocks, but okay. But at least they thought he was dead, since a week later Devin returns to make sure that Kelsey is still in the suit, only to find a different body inside. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color is different, and then Devin gets stuck and bleeds out, only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. Yeah, it's an interesting story because while Kelsey did get Springlocks, he ends up being fine, so what really happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, some think that he's the one that you should not have killed, but no matter what, we all feel like there is a high possibility that Kelsey was at least at one point possessing Golden Freddy, whether it be before the missing children's incident, afterwards, hell, maybe Kelsey possessing an animatronic is what made Afton realize that they were all possessed. Honestly, it's unknown, but given that we didn't really get a name for Golden Freddy's spirit on a grave and instead found it in a book, I guess you could say that the name Cassidy isn't set in stone. Ha, get it? You're welcome. And at 4, Nobody. The thing about hallucinations is that they're not real, and we haven't really seen Golden Freddy on any of the cameras at any point in this series. We've only seen him randomly show up in the office, even if the doors are closed and he doesn't move. The hallucinations we see are potentially because of him, but in FNAF 3, we see that those phantom animatronics are also hallucinations that are caused thanks to systems malfunctioning, and that's in a facility 30 years after the first game. So, what if Golden Freddy just isn't real? What if these are all just hallucinations that Michael is seeing due to a poor working environment and, you know, a lot of stress, and then they manifest as a version of the animatronic he feels the most guilty about because it killed his brother? I mean, it makes sense. The "it's me" would be about the animatronic. Like, it's me, the one who killed your brother, back to haunt you even more. Or it could just be him assuming that his brother would be possessing the animatronic like how the others are possessed. It would explain why we never see a physical manifestation other than in our office with obvious additional hallucinations, and it would explain why the animatronic's past is so mysterious and odd, because they aren't real. They were discontinued after FNAF 4's bite, maybe because it was too hard for William, and it would explain why the logbook that we figured was intended to give us his name was also full of hallucinations, and why it was very clearly originally meant for Mike. Huh. Maybe I should look into that one more. It would also actually let Cassidy be the one you should not have killed, because they couldn't be possessing Golden Freddy, because Golden Freddy wouldn't be real. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Shadow Freddy. One of the oldest theories in existence, or at least FNAF-wise, FNAF 2 wise, is that the Shadow animatronics are the first Springlock victims. This comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guy dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation could be used to describe the suit as a whole, or the individual Springlock mechanisms that are present within the suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside a suit failing at the same time, or more than one suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the Shadow animatronics come from. This is supported by the fact that these shadows are of Freddy and Bonnie, the 2 animatronics that have Springlock versions. However, the other popular theory is that these are spirits who were at one point possessing their respective animatronics and got kicked out for whatever reason. This is kind of where that theory idea falls apart, because there are multiple explanations as to why they were kicked out. Some say they weren't as angry as the next ones, others say that they didn't suffer as much agony, others say it's cause the one who came next simply didn't want to share. But nonetheless, despite the improbability, it's possible, and thus can be on this list. And ultimately, in at number 2, Michael Brooks. Golden Freddy is a major character within the Silver Eyes, where unlike in the games, he's possessed by a boy named Michael Brooks. In the Silver Eyes, he's also implied to be the mascot suit used to lure children away into the back rooms. Michael Brooks is a secondary protagonist in the Silver Eyes, the Twisted Ones, and in the Fourth Closet, and he's one of the children killed in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and is actually a childhood friend of Charlie. Michael is a little kid with a round face and rosy cheeks, with brown wide eyes that glisten, and short brown hair. Remember that one. He wears a blue t-shirt and was actually friends with the protagonists of the novel. He He's actually also described as a kind and friendly person with all people in the school, despite seemingly being 5 years old at the time of the missing children's incident, since Charlie was killed at 3 years old in 1983, and assuming that they were all the same age. But one day, while he was in Freddy Fazbear's with his friends, William comes in, kidnaps him, kills him, you know the deal. But then 10 years later, his parents decide to commemorate the anniversary of his tragedy and make a scholarship dedicated to a 5-year-old kid. Interesting choice. However, notice that Michael, like I said, is described as having brown hair. And in FNAF 4, we see what is possibly a tuft of brown hair poking out of the torso of a fatter yellow animatronic. Yeah, maybe more than one Michael was subjected to William's torment. And like I said, we didn't see Golden Freddy's name on the actual grave. We only got it in what would be their name in a random book. So I mean, come on. Mike's name was also in that book. Just saying. And finally, in number 1, Cassidy. I know that I've basically been saying Golden Freddy's identity isn't guaranteed this entire time, and while technically it isn't, Cassidy is typically seen as the de facto possessor of Golden Freddy, although some also view her as the one you should not have killed, aka the one possessing Afton and keeping him alive so that he can suffer. But again, if that was the case, she wouldn't be able to possess both Golden Freddy and William, so for those of you who think both, you kinda gotta pick one. However, Cassidy's name was revealed in the FNAF Survival Logbook, an activity book with a kind of like wreck this journal vibe that seemed innocent enough at first. However, as you went through the book, you'd notice that a few things were off. There'd be random tally marks on certain pages, other pages had numbers that were highlighted in red and had the incorrect page number, and then there also seemed to be a spirit writing to us in faded text. Later on in the book, we would also see words getting switched around, and we would actually notice the repeated use of Golden Freddy's signature line of "It's me." By using the highlighted numbers as coordinates in the goddamn word search for whatever reason, we would end up spelling the name Cassidy, and then everyone's like, yep, this is Golden Freddy's name, and it's just accepted now, despite the only real connection to Golden Freddy in this book being the "It's me" line, and other odd references. But after seeing 9 other options, that makes sense, for this character's actual identity, do you still think that it's Cassidy? Be sure to let me know down below, alright? If you do it respectfully, at least.